Okay, I see some people coming in, joining on LinkedIn, joining on YouTube. So I will go ahead and take us live with approximately the biggest. I realized that I chose a cup of coffee that is like the actual size of my head. It's okay. I flew into Chicago late last night. And my first meeting was at 8:30 this morning, which breaks my own rules against early meetings. But sometimes you're in a sprint phase of life, and that is what's going on today. Um, Maybe we should start with some introductions. This is our first thing that we've
Yeah.
ever done together. Do you want to
Oh, I
kick us
see.
off? Tell
Okay,
the
that is true.
people who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So, yeah, obviously, thank you for bringing me on with this. My name is Mohan Muthoo. I am based in the United Kingdom, not too far out from London, and I run Spring Drive, which is essentially a GTM engineering agency. So we help other businesses build a pipeline and book meetings with their ICP, and we're using a lot of those sort of new wave tools, which I'm sure we'll talk about today to do that. Yeah.
I'm super excited for that part of the conversation because while I have an insanely large tech stack for myself, because I love tech, I'm so curious about it. I love testing new tech. That is a piece of the business that I do not touch. Like I love doing the strategy, the processes, the people. I do not love doing
Yeah.
tech stack implementation or tech stack stuff. So I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm very excited to learn from you on that piece. Hi, folks. My name is Leslie Venetz. I'm the founder of the Sales-Led Go-to-Market Agency, or if you let me put this back up, or if you look at how I spelled it on the piece of collateral I created myself, the sales. Maybe I was inspired by you being English, that I wanted it to be like a bit more Shakespearean or something,
Shakespeare,
Mohan.
yes.
I don't know what was getting into
Maybe.
me. Yeah, we'll see. Um, but I work with organizations in a done with you consulting capacity, and we work on top of funnel strategy, creating the processes to support that strategy, and then enabling the team with the skill sets and the mindsets to be able to own the processes and get all the top of funnel goodness going. So we are obviously today going to talk about top of funnel generally. We're going to talk about it from a strategic perspective, but then we also want to get into some of the meat, like literally what does it take to get messaging out there that people pay attention to? What channels are you using? What is working? What isn't working? And then, as we hinted, some of the like tech stack enablement
Yeah.
pieces. So maybe we'll just like start generally, and folks, like please drop your questions in the chat as well. This is as much about us sharing our knowledge as it is about us being available to answer your questions with our expertise, particular sense. I know, Mohan, that we have a very like a shared language and a shared philosophy of what good
Mhm.
looks like, but the way we support companies in achieving those outcomes is quite different. So
Right.
I want people to ask questions so that they can get kind of two complementary but unique perspectives in reply. But maybe we'll start with a bit of a like a softball. Like what? Why is outbound so freaking hard right now?
It's such a good question. I think that, and obviously, if we think about the three big areas of outbound, you've got LinkedIn, you've got email, and you've got the phone, right? And they all have their different challenges. But I think, generally speaking, particularly since the turn of 2020, all of these channels are just far more popular, right? They're just being used more often. I think it's a very basic thing, really. If you like, it's something of an economic issue, which is that the more popular something becomes, the more inundated it becomes, and the more inundated it becomes, the more that people become numb to that messaging, right? So the threshold for, I think, quality has gone up. Um, I actually think, and it's funny because you introduced me kind of in this way too, about talking about tech stack, right, and all this kind of stuff. It can be a little bit of a red herring because when we talk about tech stack, efficiency, speed, particularly on the research side, so we can talk a little about like AI and LLMs there. They're really powerful. I think all teams need to be using this right now. But it is actually still strategy. It's still messaging strategy that makes that end result. So I think one of the things that, to answer the question, why is it so hard? I think it's just more prevalent. But I think a big mistake that some teams are doing is they think the solution is the automation, and it's not, right? The automation of the tech is how we do things faster and more efficiently. But I think the solution to why outbound is so hard is kind of going back to that strategy element, which obviously is very much your wheelhouse as well, right? Which is asking the question. I always think of it in this way. Whenever I'm speaking to a client or a potential client, I say, look, whether it's a LinkedIn or a email, and maybe phone, we can say is slightly different in context. Most of the companies, certainly that I speak, and I imagine yours are the same, are targeting very crowded markets. They're often hitting the US, hitting Europe, SaaS companies, basically people who are getting a lot of messaging as it is, very busy people. If you're in back-to-back meetings all day, let's say this person has 10 minutes for lunch, and then they've got another meeting they've got to crack on with, they're starving. And they finally pick up that sandwich they've been thinking about all morning. The sandwich is halfway in their mouth, and they see your email. Are they putting the sandwich down? That's all it's really about. And how you put that message together, whether you use the craziest tools in the world, whether you automated it with this cool thing, at that point, it doesn't matter. It's about the message on the screen. So I think, it's a combination of how the market has changed, with things just being more popular. And so there's just a lot more competition. But also, I think this slight skew in direction where companies are trying to target it by going straight to the tech, assuming that's the solution for that. And actually, the solution is have a better message, which people put their sandwich down for. That's what I would say.
Oof. Yes. Okay. That sparked so many thoughts. Let's come back to sales messaging. I want to put that aside for a second because I think that is such a big topic. But a couple of other things that immediately sparked for me is, one, most of the people that are sending these outbound messages have never managed an inbox where they are literally getting hundreds of messages a day. So they do not know what it feels like to manage an inbox at that volume. I certainly did. And I had, I had been in sales leadership for many years, and a lot of it was spent in a player coach role. So I was holding a bag while managing a team of 6, sometimes significantly larger. And it wasn't until I got a director title that the inbox just was flooded. And it was a real aha moment for me when I got that director title, when I started getting 400 emails a day, every single day. And a lot of them were inbound, but a lot of them were external. And it was a constant sense of overwhelm when I looked at my own inbox. So if an email was not very easy to action, if it wasn't something that felt urgent, something that I had to action right now, if it wasn't something that really gave me a compelling reason to want to respond, and then on top of that was extremely easy to scan, so technically written in a way that was easy for me to digest, I simply was going to delete it. I was probably first going to ignore it, maybe flag it for follow-up, maybe put it in a folder, but still ultimately delete it. And at the point where you are getting hundreds of emails a day, you are looking for emails that are easy to delete. And I simply, because most of the reps sending outbound have never managed an inbox like that, I don't think that they understand that their prospects are literally looking for the emails that are the ones they can quickly delete without any fear that they're missing out on something. So that was one thing that popped into my head straight away.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question there, actually.
Yeah, please.
I know we don't want to touch on sales messaging just yet, and I have so many things running through, so I'll pause on that. But here's a question for you, because I know you've probably seen, and I've seen them as well. There are actually some SaaS tools coming out now that are designed to help people remove outbound messaging from their inboxes. So I won't name names of these tools, but I've seen some of them that are basically will help you make sure that any external email that comes in, it's automatically out of your hair, essentially. Do you think that, and maybe sales is not the right target to think about, but do you think that generally speaking, those senior executives who are used to getting a lot of emails, do you think they would look at that and be like, oh, I want to use that? Or do you think most of them are just it's fine, I just ignore it? What do you think?
I think that I spent most of my career selling to C-suite, enterprise C-suite. They're not going to use a tool like that. That's what they have executive assistants for. So no, but I could see we spend a lot of our time in this ecosystem of like sellers selling sales tech to salespeople.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a particular circle to be in. Exactly.
So I could see a lot of that like startup founder group being interested in a tool like that. Do you remember there was a guy called Andy? His last name is escaping me. Such a nice guy. But he had a tool on the market for a while called Gated, where I think you donated $1 to charity. And that's how you verified that you were a real person. So you would get an auto reply back to say, like, Andy's received your email. It's not in his primary yet, but if you would like to get it into his primary inbox, confirm that you're a real person by donating $1. And I've seen one other version of that, and those did not take off. And I feel like that's the most lovely application of sort of gatekeeping your own inbox. I don't know. That was a really, really long way of saying, I don't think that's the answer. And I think that that is much more likely to catch marketing spam than sales, sales emails.
Without turning this into a talk about deliverability, because it could become that very easily. But I think that, and a lot of us speak about this in our space where, if you think about the two major ESPs, Outlook and Google, right? They have this sort of perennial battle with companies wanting to say to their users, hey, like messages that you don't want to receive, like we're going to try and not have those messages arrive in your inbox. But particularly for business, they also understand that like companies have to be able to message other companies that are external to them. Like, do you know what I mean? Like business has to continue to take place. So I think that, I agree with you. I think that's probably why things like that, where it's like pay $1 to get into the primary inbox, it doesn't work, because you've got people who, let's say, aside from marketing and sales, they're just reaching out to a company about something completely different, right? They might be partners already, but they're an external organization from an ESP perspective. And then if you have this sort of tech set up, these sort of systems in place where it's like, well, you've got to pay $1 to email this person, it doesn't, right? It kind of falls apart. But anyway, like I said, I don't want to jump into deliverability and make that the sort of focus of today. But I think that's definitely a piece to be thinking about, though, even on the tech side. I think from that specifically for the email channel.
Two things on deliverability. One, I totally agree that like we could have an entire conversation about deliverability. I am working on like the final edits of my book, and I have a very small section on deliverability. And because I was like, I am not a deliverability expert, here are the things that you need to be aware of, that like you need to go out and research and make sure that you have in place, because it doesn't matter if everything else is perfect. If you have absolutely like tanked your domain, you're not going to be landing in the primary, even with like exceptional chef's kiss messaging. And one of the notes from the editor was like, you should expand on this. And I was like, respectfully, no.
Respectfully,
that is like somebody else's book to write. That is not my book to write. But it also made me think of, I had a post a couple of months ago about quick question and how I just find it to be an infuriating subject line. And every time I do a post like that, there's people in the comments being like, but I've used quick question for years and it's amazing. And I'm like, cool. Quick question did work. Like there was a time when it worked, but it followed, like quick question is so, I think, a perfect example of why tricks and trends do not work in outbound, because it is a cute little like trick to get attention. It is a cute little trend. And then everybody starts using it. And then our prospects start associating it with cold outbound emails. They start associating it with spam. So even if it's not setting off the Outlook, the Gmail spam filters, that is setting off their mental spam filters. But I had two people on that post, executives, like proper executives, tell me that they have set up their own filters, and any email with the subject questions is routed to spam. That's crazy, right?
Crazy.
Brilliant.
But I think, as you say, it is brilliant because, and this is that, if you like that, thinking about it from an economic perspective, where it's like, how does an economy work in this kind of sense, right? Looking at it as a market, as it gets more popular, particularly because the whole point is different. Let's be honest, when we distill what we're doing, it's all differentiation. positive differentiation. That's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
So it gets more popular, and then and then stops working. But I think, and I hear this as well. I hear people will say to me even today, like, we've used it and it's good. I think the thing to remember is, like, and again, this comes back to this whole sales messaging stuff. It's not a black and white science, right? It's not like this works, that doesn't work. But you've always got to ask yourself the question, what you're trying to do at all times is put your best foot forward. So quick question might work. Is this your best foot forward, though? In a world where this has been done 100,000 times, and your email probably has a number of things in there that quick question doesn't really touch on, or doesn't really, is that? And usually the answer to that question is going to be no, it's not. But it worked for some people, so why not try it? So I think, and that's why it's hard sometimes, because you'll sometimes, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, you'll speak to a client who will say, what should we do here? You'll give them some advice and say, well, this isn't great. And then they'll come back to you and say, well, actually, we tried it with this thing and we got a positive response. So you don't know what you're talking about. No one's saying that these things never work ever anymore, and you'll never get anything good coming from it, right? But the idea is, when you're doing things at scale, when you're thinking about, and I think this is the important part, it's not about one campaign. It's not about one metric. It's about repeatable pipeline, right? What is actually sustainable for your team? This is the point, right? And that's where you have to be thinking a bit more intelligently, rather than it works sometimes, even though we're being a bit lazy with our strategy, but we've heard it works, so why not? That's, I think, where teams need it. And actually, what's interesting, what you mentioned about deliverability, about how, even if your messaging is perfect, if you don't get some of these things right, things aren't going to land in the inbox. I'll be honest with you, the irony is, most of the times I look at companies and what they're doing, and they show me their inside their sort of infrastructure and so on, it's the other way around. They've actually ticked most of the boxes, except for they've been really lazy with their messaging. And in deliverability, the way I like to look at it is, you've got two things. You've got pre-send deliverability and you've got post-send deliverability. And pre-send is basically, if you like, that checklist that you were saying, don't really want to go into this, DMARC, DKIM, SPF, warming, all that kind of stuff, right? And that is kind of a checklist. Like, if you know it, you just tick the boxes. Just do it. Don't think about it. Just do it correctly. Post-send is where it gets more interesting, because if your messaging is poor quality, let's say because you've been lazy, because you've used quick question too many times, or whatever it is, right? The ESPs will look at how it's being received. They're looking at it from a qualitative perspective.
Right.
So if your prospects, even if you've done all that stuff correctly, if your prospects go, oh, another quick question, I'm not even going to read this, throw it in the thing. If they look at your messaging, and because you spend virtually no time on it, they're like, oh, this is not targeted. This is not even an interesting offer. I'm putting it to spam. ESPs look at that behavior, and they make a decision then on, what do we do with more emails coming out from these domains. So you might say, let's say you do that first campaign with this kind of messaging, poor subject lines. Let's say the next campaign, you say, you know what, I'm going to pull up my socks here and put something really amazing together. And you do. Amazing message. You've really thought about it. By that point, those domains may already be affected to the point that your good messages now go straight to spam, because you've already told the ESP from your previously poor messaging, people don't want this stuff, even if all of your pre-send deliverability, the SPF, the DKIM is on point. So I think there's a bit of that sort of irony to it, right? And again, it comes back to all this tool stuff, where companies, they want to dive into the automation, they want to dive into the stuff that is kind of shiny, right? Like, all this, but it comes back to messaging. It comes back to great messaging, even on the deliverability front, most of the time.
I love that pre-post deliverability distinction. I think that was really, really well said. Two things that I see come up a lot. One is, seller sales leaders are the kings and queens of like, but I got this one response this one time. And like, I think spending a little bit of time talking about the importance of repeatability is a critical element in this conversation. When I am working with clients, what I'm teaching them is best practice. Here is what is most likely to work the greatest number of times. Once you do that for long enough that you have a good data set, so that you know what good looks like for your organization, like with good messaging, with reasonable domain health, then you can get creative. Then you can have fun with it. Then you can get creative. Then you can do some tests to see like what works, what doesn't, because you have that baseline so you can know if you are improving or if you are taking a direction that is simply not working and is going to create some of those like knock on post issues. And that conversation around the importance of like creating a baseline and repeatability and using data before you start like finding, fun, creative ways to put like GIFs and memes in every single one of your emails has taught me over the past 3 years of doing this work full time that my job is about change management, like more than anything else. Like, sure, I need all the expertise for how to build the sequences and the channels and the messaging, but like getting these folks to understand from a change management perspective the why, the repeatability is so
100%.
important. And oh my gosh, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I think also, as you say, it's a mindset thing, because sometimes it's like that the work that it takes to develop that comes from the mindset of how are you approaching this. Like whenever I get someone come to me and say, we need to see results in 2 weeks, otherwise we don't know if this is going to work. It's like, well, from the off, I can tell this is exactly right, because you're not looking at this from the right perspective. And I think that's what feeds into doing things the right way. Because a company, I think, that says, look, we need to get results really, really fast. We need to show management that like we've ticked the boxes they're expecting us to tick, are the ones who, for example, say, let's do a quick question because we can point to a bunch of data that's worked before. So we did the safe thing, right? And we're not, going out there and so on. But in reality, what you need to do is say, look, we're willing to test these things and maybe fail over this first month so that we can start entering more interesting, for example, potentially being more creative and finding what is sustainable. Because sometimes what's sustainable is, and I've had this with clients before where we ran a bunch of messaging and I've looked and been like quietly to myself, I'm like, this one's going to work. I can see it. It's great. And then I get surprised sometimes. It's like, actually, something else ended up working. And even if the other message got, let's say, a positive lead sooner or maybe more positive leads overall, but the other one was better at building pipeline, right? But it just took a bit more time to find that and see that in the actual data. So I think, and you're absolutely right, it's a mentality thing. As you say, in terms of change management, sometimes what we'll do is actually say, look, we need to, before you dive into sending and building out email copy, people tend to start with email copy. And I'm like, that's not where you start here, right? Often we'll take a step back and say, let's look at your current assets. Do you actually have segmented social proof in terms of case studies built out yet? Do you have a compartmentalized offer for outbound? Or are you going out there in a market with a 20K a month retainer core offer and assuming that companies that don't know you are going to jump on board immediately? So starting out with that strategy and then saying, okay, now we can decide what's the most intelligent way to go and test that and so on. And that is what leads, I think, to, as you say, the repeatability, the sustainable pipeline. But it just takes a bit more upfront, right? In terms of effort, in terms of, and again, you come back to the tech side. This is not stuff that tech will solve for you. I mean, we can talk about AI and how LLMs are, let's say, somewhat more involved in the process now because they're actually a little bit more intelligent and they're a bit more accurate and precise in what you can use them to do. But I think we're going to have the same problem. It's kind of like the quick question thing. Became popular or became really effective. Loads of people used it, became ineffective. I think we're going to have the same thing with AI, with LLMs.
We're already seeing it.
People are already seeing it, right? Because there's two sides to AI, actually. There's one side that I just say, don't even bother with it. And there's another side which I'm very much an advocate of. The first is, if you think about, and the best way to describe this is ChatGPT personalized first lines, right? So people will say, here's the LinkedIn, ChatGPT, look at the LinkedIn, write a personalized first lines. And they're almost always terrible, right? Either because they are written poorly.
In today's sales landscape, having a XYZ strategy is a game changer.
It's atrocious, right? And I think the other thing is, most of the time, LinkedIn now is pretty surface level, unless you have someone who's really posting a lot. But a lot of these guys won't be, right? A lot of people's ICP are not posting all the time and so on. But then the other side of it is using AI and LLMs for the research. And it is slightly different here. Like, we've seen this as well. Today, particularly the deep research modules, can find research and understand and go out there and bring back data on, let's say, one of your accounts quicker and probably get more data than, let's say, an SDR would or even an AE would. So that's where it's really effective. But I think the mistake that we don't want sales teams to slip into is saying, well, let's now and get AI to come up with everything, the strategy, the copy, and so on. And I think the same thing will happen. Everyone will have homogenous sounding strategies. And it's the teams that sit back and say, we need to think about how we differentiate, and then use these tools and use this tech to go and execute that faster and more efficiently and more precisely. Those are the things that will win.
Yes. So brilliant for so many reasons. Like long for years. I started working with Reggie.ai like 3 years ago, like before ChatGPT was a thing that people knew about, like before people were using those words. And from day one, I was like, oh, what a cool assistive, but not replacive technology. Okay, a couple of things. One, I love that you said that people jump into writing copy and that's not the first thing they should be doing. When I go through my like tofu process, it's 9 steps. And fourth is writing copy. We go through 3 steps before we start writing copy. And it is like that territory strategy and how are you like chunking out your list so you have really, really tight personas that you are going after, and how do you create persona like segment specific value props, and then what does that messaging look like as you build it into the micro campaign. Then you start writing messaging, and then you build it into your sequences. And it's one of the reasons I love sequences, because it also takes some of the burden off of trying to make every message a perfect message, because you get the privilege of telling a story across many touches, across many channels. But here's what I kept thinking when you were sharing that perspective is, one of the talk tracks I see coming up again and again and again with AI is use AI to get those like low value, low risk tasks off your plate. And then the next thing they say is use AI for prospecting. And I don't think that prospecting is a low value task.
Yeah.
So it's at odds for me.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because I think it depends on a few things, right? So I think, as an example, if you're targeting, enterprise, very large ACV accounts, right? You've got, let's say, a very tight ABS list, ABM list. In that context, it's like, maybe actually it is worth your time spending time on each account and looking at that and really, going in depth there. If you're doing, mid-market SMEs, and you've got, your TAM is massive, like really, really big, right? And it might be that you have a very, very long list that you're reaching out to each month. I think, and I agree with you. I think, and again, I think it's that we're trying to find that balance between, we shouldn't be looking at prospecting as a low value task, because you're going to get low value output, and that is going to feed into the messaging, and they're going to basically not look at it, right? Everything comes back to that. How does this feed into what comes out in that end message to the person you're going to be reaching out to? I think what it is more a question of how we use the AI in prospecting. And an example might be, we did this for a client as well, where we said, look, we had a client who was looking at companies that they had a very specific use case of where a company would be relevant. So it wasn't just like this industry, these kind of things, but it was companies that had like a very specific like government code attached to their supplier chain or something like that. Manually doing that, you would take a long time to find the relevant data, but also you'd probably miss a ton. That's where I think AI in, let's say, the prospecting workflow can be really powerful today, because we're able to say, look, we need companies that have this kind of stuff. Go and do really deep research and find all the things that will help us narrow down those targets as quickly as possible. And it can come up with lots of things that sometimes you won't always think about. It depends sometimes on the company maturity, right? Like a lot of companies and sales teams, they have their stuff really nailed down in terms of, we know exactly who we're reaching out to. Here are all the things on. But that's where I think AI in the prospecting phase becomes really powerful. Now, and moving on slightly to like tech stack and how this integrates, let's take a tool like Clay. Clay is sort of the big one on the market right now. It's very, it's a pillar of what we do in terms of our campaign building for clients as well. When we think about AI for prospecting and AI for outbound, we're not asking the AI to, let's say, the AI to go and write an email for this person. right? And because again, the output isn't great. But what we might say is we've got a list of 10,000 marketing titles across this large TAM who we're reaching out to. What we can do with AI is say, well, look, if I'm going to go into this and look into it, it's going to take me 1,000 years, right? But what we can do is we can say very, very quickly and efficiently, segment those who are in content marketing from those who are in performance marketing, from those who are in brand, from those who are, and so on and so forth. And then we can score that to very easily say, okay, what I can do now is like a 20% that are in content marketing, those people, we're going to put a little note very, very quickly in our table automatically so that they're going to get a message that's relevant to them. The 40% that's doing performance, relevant to them, and so on and so forth. And I think this is where it becomes more interesting, is what we can use the AI to do, for example, in a tool like Clay. And Clay isn't the only tool, by the way, it's what we use and recommend, but we can layer that. So we can say, okay, job title, we pass that out with AI. Let's also pass out where they're based. So we want to send a message to, marketing, performance marketers that are on the East Coast, maybe slightly different to the content marketers on the West Coast, right? So, and you can do as many layers as possible to create that, what I would describe as hyper segmentation, right? There's really no end to how much you can chop that list up. But the key thing is that we are then going to think deeply as humans about, okay, we've got these segments now. What message does this segment want to hear versus this segment versus this segment? And actually use our experience and our own data to write that. And then we can pass those as variables into a handwritten message versus ChatGPT go and write, here's a LinkedIn profile on a website, go and write an email, which is terrible. So I think that's probably the difference. And I think at least where we are now in terms of using AI in prospecting. But I think most sales teams aren't doing that. I think most of them are saying, we try GPT,
like
write an
very
email.
few sales teams very few sales teams actually have an ICP. They think they have an ICP, and then you ask them and they're like,
Exactly.
well, it's anybody in this entire department in any of these 7 industries. And it's like,
Yeah.
Cool, that's not an ICP, but good talk. What you just described, I think, is the only way to do outbound unless you are running an ABM campaign. And so generally the way I think about it is that, like, to even start thinking that ABM approach is right for you, you need to be at like a minimum of 30,000 in annual revenue. Like minimum. Like that's where the maths start mathing with that. But here's the historical reason that I think folks really, really struggle with the approach that you just outlined, which is also the approach that I take. I call them micro campaigns. And I think I heard you say hyper segmentation, but like same exact thought process, is that there's a mindset issue with sellers always wanting the silver bullet. And there is a historical narrative in sales that you either take a quantity approach or a quality approach. And for whatever reason, we as a profession have it set in our heads that like either your entire approach is like deep contact level personalization for every single email, which I think is stupid and wrong and gross. There are just so few price points that justify that type of outreach. And let's be perfectly honest, most of the contact level personalization that folks are getting is disingenuous and disconnected from the message. Like, hi, I saw that you hiked Machu Picchu in 2019. Like, was it amazing? Anyway, buy my widget. Like, that is a waste of time.
Yeah.
So they're checking the box, but they are not doing a type of contact level personalization that is meaningless, or they are going quality or quantity and they are just spamming. They are like opening the spam cannons, spray and pray, spam the TAM, whatever you want to say. And my approach, like yours, is very much in the middle. How do we bridge quality and quantity? And that is 100% by building super, super tight lists. And generally I look at least 5 layers, meaning we are not just doing healthcare, but we are like, what's the sector within healthcare? Maybe it's only long-term care facilities, and then they are only in this specific geo, and then they are only in, a specific revenue band or have a specific number of employees. We are only going after a specific title because what for instance, director of finance cares about is significantly different than what is going to get the attention of a CFO. So creating enough layers of segmentation that the list that you get, it may only be 32 contacts, but it's 32 contacts and you can send the same exact message to every single one of them because you have taken the time to deeply understand what matters to that specific persona. And your list is tight enough that you can then create really thoughtful, really relevant messaging that matters to all 32 of those. So it is personalization at scale. It is just not personalization at the scale that most organizations demand, but they're the same organizations that say things like, we need to get results from this in 2 weeks to show it was worth it. They're the same organizations that go through their VPs of sales every 12 to 18 months. So there's some like deep systemic problems in terms of like the narratives, the silver bullets, the dichotomy between quality and quantity that we see. And I think that is why so few organizations take the approach that we're prescribing.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think part of the reason also is that what we're particularly as a strategy, but also just even being able to do it at scale is just so new, right? So I think part of it is teams will catch up to this.
But it's not that new. I'm going to push back on that. It is not that new. Most of these filters are things that have been in CRMs for ages.
Yeah.
I've been doing signal-based outreach via Google Alerts for almost 20 years. So it is, because of tools like Clay, it is easier to access, it is easier to do and faster than ever before, but it's not new. It just takes work that very few organizations have been willing to do.
I think you're absolutely right that, as you say, the ability to access a signal like that has been there for a long time. I think what the new part is the ability to execute on that at scale. And I actually think it's possible you and I may diverge our opinions on this. And I think this is where we find a lot of companies, and this is kind of what you were saying as well, right? They don't really understand the idea of the difference between a large, let's say, list of prospects that is basically unchopped, unsegmented, and then this sort of fine segmentation that you do. So we actually do, high volume kind of campaigns, but we will reach out to a large volume of people. But that volume that we're reaching out to, we spend the most of our time not in a database, right? We spend most of our time doing that hyper segmentation where you might chop a list up that's quite large into, let's say, for example, as you mentioned, you've got like 32 people with this hyper relevant messaging to them, but we might be able to have a ton of those segments in that campaign.
Absolutely.
And so I think being able to pass that out as well. But tell me one thing. I'm interested to see if you see this as well, and it comes back to that messaging side of things, which is what we find as well when it comes to outbound of any kind, for that matter. I will slightly asterisk calling, but certainly on LinkedIn and email, the thing that matters more than anything beyond signals and so on is really the strategy and what you're offering that person. Because most people are busy, and when you talked about as well, like when you're at that level, you're getting 400 messages a day, particularly today where it's being used a lot more. Like people know, like even if you get the data right, you're telling them something they already know, and they're busy. What they want to see is like, what are you offering? What are you offering to give me here? Because people are, I think, particularly in the business context, ultimately, they're busy, they're self-interested, they know it's a sales context. What are you offering me? And so what we found is the segmentation is really powerful, not because you can then say, I saw you're a director of finance at this place, right? They know that. It's powerful because it means that we can say, well, now we can go back to the drawing board and think about how do we come up with an actual offer that each of these segments would really want to hear. what we do all the time now is focus on initial value. We don't want to go in there immediately say, do you have 30 minutes free? They don't know who you are yet. It's almost always too soon to do that, depending on if it's first party trigger data or, but that's a different thing. But we always find that's the main thing. And I'm interested from your perspective, particularly because I think, strategy is very, very much where you spend a lot of time with clients. Is that something that, because we always struggle to get clients to be like, wait, I know you just want to ram this offer down everyone's inbox, but can we come back and figure out, is there some way that we can compartmentalize this? Can we talk about lead magnets? What's your experience with that in terms of how you find teams?
Yeah. I think about this from a few different perspectives. Sort of my overarching philosophy is earn the right. So I'm always thinking about what have I done to earn the right to make this ask? And that is true for like, I am asking for your attention to even open the email. I am asking for your time to click on something that I have sent you. I'm really asking for your time if I'm asking for a meeting. So I'm always thinking about what have I done to earn the right to make this ask of somebody. So I do a couple of different things. I'm a huge fan of escalating calls to action. So on the assumption that I have built a sequence that adds value as it goes along, I'll start with the CTA lights, like worth a chat. And then not until later in the sequence do I add in direct asks for time, because I am trying to make sure that I have shown enough of like my expertise. I've shown enough relevance. I've made enough deposits. Like I've given enough value that I've earned the right to ask for that. And so then related to that is, how can I add value, share that relevance, like build that, kind of rapport via email or via LinkedIn in a way that is as frictionless as possible. And so two things that I constantly come back to. One is from the challenger, like challenger sale, challenger customer. Challenger customer is my favorite book of all time. If people have not read it, you need to go read it immediately. It's significantly better than challenger sale. But what they talk about a lot is having an insight that is meaningful. And so people will often share insights like, I see that you are title at company. Like reading the news back to somebody, reading their LinkedIn profile back to them is a huge waste of time. Or they'll try to share an insight, but their insight will be like 98% of CIOs care about cybersecurity. No shit. Who would have known that 98? What's going on with those other 2%? That would have been significantly more interesting to share. So it's sharing something that is information that they may not have access to or may not be aware of if I don't give that to them. So that's one approach to like giving that value, showing that relevance. And the other one is that I do love giving deposits. Right? Making deposits before asks. And when I say deposit, I mean like invitations to webinars that are actually webinars, not like veiled sales pitches, like white papers, reports, case studies. Again, case studies that actually share value, that aren't just veiled sales pitches. But what I find that folks get wrong is they'll be like, here, Mohan, here's your like 92-page state of sales report. And that is adding overwhelm. That is adding friction. Like you did not give me something valuable. You gave me work to do. So being really dialed in with saying, like in the PS, I'll include the report, but the body of the email is like on page 12 of the state of sales report, they shared X and it's relevant to you for Y reason. This is why it's related to the thing that I share, or, that I can solve the outcome that I can deliver for you, or the benefit you care about, like, worth a chat. So a couple of different strategies that I deploy, like both the escalating calls to action so that I've made sure I've earned the right to ask for the thing, the attention, the click through, the time, and then making it as easy as possible for the recipient to get the value that I am trying to deliver by not reading them the news, by not telling them what their job title is, by not giving them more work to do.
I think that's absolutely spot on. And the first one, by the way, interestingly, this is where AI is becoming really powerful. So we often do this, and we might describe it as agentic research, but like we'll get a client a deep dive into their ICP. And some of the questions we'll ask, because we find a lot, kind of as you said, the company doesn't always actually know their ICP as well as maybe they should or could, putting it nicely, right? But so we'll often talk to LLMs and sort of do this agentic research where we'll say, look, here's who they're going after. What kind of information would actually be really, really interesting to this ICP that they probably don't know right now, and which is relevant and which is trending and which is going to impact them over the next 6 months?
Yeah.
The key word that I like to say teams should have in mind when they think about, there's so many things, right? But one of the things when you look at an email is, does it surprise you? And if it doesn't surprise you, you should probably think about how you can do better. And when I say surprise, I mean in the sense of, if you think about these kind of individuals who are getting emails, and it's the same thing with LinkedIn, by the way, for sure, LinkedIn messaging as well, right? Getting these messages all the time, whether it's through the insight or whether it's through the offer, you want them to have the feeling when they read that of, oh, I hardly ever get this, right? That's the sense, that's the thing you're trying. And one way to do it, as you say, is you can't go in there and say, hey, did you know that salespeople right now are thinking about messaging? Like, they know it. But if you can say something that they actually really probably don't know, but which is really interesting, or as you say, offering, and this is what we do a lot, right? Lead magnet strategy, which is we're going to offer something, as you called it, deposits, right? We're going to deposit something. We're going to give them something really valuable. And I come back to this as well, where I'm like, look, we want to try, and we have if you like, a 3-tier framework for when we think about what kind of magnets should we be strategizing. And the first thing is actually that it's usable or actionable. So sometimes we find that what people really like is something that they can use in some way. People love to send playbooks. You could say that's usable to some extent because they can go and look at that and apply it to what they're doing internally. But even in a more really specific way, like, again, it depends on what the use case is. But sending over like a calculator that works out a specific kind of thing for their KPIs, for their metrics. I'll give you an example. We ran a campaign targeting local businesses, actually, for a marketing agency. So small scale kind of outreach. And initially we tested very, very conventional messaging. We do this, we're really good. Do you want to find out more? And people were like, we got some good replies, not bad. Then we said, okay, let's actually offer to send them Facebook marketing copy for their ads. So we went in the campaign and we were like, we saw your website. We'll spin up Facebook ad copy because we know what works really well, and we'll just send it to you if you want it. And the yeses just started streaming in, and so, and I think part of the reason there is it's actionable. They can be like, oh, I'll literally copy and paste this and just throw it in my ads. The second thing is that it's personalized. Operationally, this becomes more challenging if you're doing things at scale, but that comes back to the hyper segmentation, right?
Yeah.
So if you segmented that list really finely, you can have a different asset that you send this segment versus this segment and so on. So they get something, as you mentioned as well, with like, let's say you're sending a white paper or a case study, instead of just having it go out there, even the framing of the case study, you could say, do you want this case study on a company similar to you? Or you could say, do you want this case study which shows how they increased, this metric by X percentage in this really weird way? Like touching on the psychology of people, I think is part of that. And then the final thing is kind of what I said, is making it surprising. Are you offering to send them something which they probably get offered 100 times a day? Or are you offering them something which actually I don't really get that? And I think that's a really important part of it, right? That ability to surprise your audience to some extent, right? To make them feel like I just don't receive this often, particularly for those busy decision makers who aren't going to read your email. They're going to scan it. They're going to look for why should I always say this. People, I think, have this misconception that a prospect reads your email and then decides whether they like it or not. They don't. They scan it and decide whether to read the email, right? That tends to be what happens. And so if you've got, words and things in there that just fit that pattern, they're not going to read it. Whereas if they scan it and they just kind of see the CTA is like, oh, do you want this thing? They're going to be like, oh, that's kind of interesting, and read through it. So I think, I think that's that element of being able to surprise people in the email or the LinkedIn message for that matter, is really important. I take that phones are slightly different. It's a different kind of ball game in terms of the conversation, all the rest of it. But certainly for written outreach, and from what I'm seeing, I think very few teams are really focusing on that. I think they're very excited to get on the tech and the automation, but very few teams are really going back to that strategy part and thinking, how do we stand out and how do we differentiate? Which I'm sure you're seeing a lot as well.
Oh yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know from your side as well on the tech piece, what you're seeing in terms of sort of uptake on tech. I know obviously teams are aware of it, that there's a lot of new tech floating around, that it's something they need to be thinking about. But I don't know what you're seeing in terms of, how fast are they adopting some of these new technologies and so on? Or are they kind of, I know for the bigger companies, it's obviously harder. They move slower. I don't know your experiences on that at the moment.
They aren't. Like I think that I see companies that are racing to use AI to send messaging at scale, to like give over that process where they're sending like fully automated campaigns. The AI is writing the message, the AI is sending the message on email and LinkedIn. I do not think that that is outbound selling. Like I think that that is sending marketing messages. Like they are very bad messages. They are extremely generic. There is no strategy or thoughtfulness behind them. They are not relevant. They are not sharing anything of value. They're marketing messages. Like that is not strategic outbound sales. And it is validating why buyers already hate us, because we are harassing them. Like we are just inundating them with very, very, very low quality message, just at the highest volume. So I would say that's the primary way right now I am seeing AI being used. But I have to say, like, so I use ZoomInfo as my like primary data provider, and some of the stuff that they're rolling out with like they have, I mean, they've been doing GTM intelligence, but now they have this new GTM studio. And I also use another tool called Omni that is a research tool that it's slick. It's really slick. And I bring up those examples because it is not enough to like have the data and have the signals and have the AI and have the research if we are not doing the extraordinarily important work of connecting the dots. Like I literally started writing a post because I was using Omni to prep for a call yesterday, and I was asking it those questions and it was feeding everything back. And I thought, oh my God, this is a perfect example of how to create a point of view from all of the, like from what's going on with the segment, the market conditions and the persona and like what's going on with the account. And so check my LinkedIn, that post coming soon. But that's what's really missing, is that like folks are not using the AI to create a point of view, to write that strategic messaging, to say something that is relevant. They are just using it to try to move faster. So they are sending more of the messaging that already isn't working at scale, and it's deeply disappointing. We only have a few minutes left, and I do want to just talk about messaging a little bit. Can we leave folks with maybe like a few hot tips about what is working in messaging? We already talked about calls to action, making sure there's like one clear, concise call to action, doing escalating calls to action. I heard you talk about the reality. This is super data back, folks. Mohan is not making this up. Your prospects are not reading your emails. They are scanning them. The current data says about like 7 to 8 seconds. So that is like they are scanning them to see if it is something that they can easily delete, or if it's worth maybe flagging for later, or if you're really nailing it, something worth actioning now. What are some of those other like super actionable hot tips that people should be thinking of? Don't use quick question.
Yeah, that's top of the list. First thing I'd say is something that I would describe as pop strategy. When you read your email, is there a word in there or a phrase in there that pops out and fits pattern? You probably had this. I get it. Everyone gets it. Tons of emails offering like SEO services.
Yeah.
When I see an email like that, I don't see an email. I see the word
Delete.
SEO capitalized. It pops out. I move out. As something I always say is those companies could quite easily use traffic. I'm more interested in traffic than I am about SEO services. But what's happening there is they are leaning in on a pattern that prospects have about what they feel when they see an email with a big SEO in there. This applies to lots of other examples as well. But so for companies, when they write their emails, ask yourself, when you look at that, when you scan it, the feel and the schematic of the email, not just the writing and the language, is there something in there that just pops out at you that's going to make the prospect fit that pattern? It could be, it's often an acronym that's capitalized. It could be something like even the first few words. Like even now, I think when you start an email with, I noticed it's like, done. I know what this is, right?
Bye.
So
Yep.
small things. So that's the first thing I think. Think about what pops out and get rid of that. And same thing, by the way, the flip side of that. If you have something that you think can pop out positively, like mentioning one of their colleagues, use that in the email, right? Because that's a way to do the opposite. They scan it, they see their colleague's name in there who's sitting to their left. They go, oh, I better read this, right? The other thing I would say is talking about messaging is come back to what are you offering and think specifically about your market. And what I mean by that is a good email isn't enough. You're not trying to write a good email. You're trying to very different. I've had lots of emails where I read it and gone, that's a really good email. And then I've just not replied, right? And they probably think it's crap. It's not crap. It's a good email, but it just didn't compel a reply. So ask yourself, am I emailing a market that is crowded? Are they getting lots of emails because of their market, where they are, etc.? And if they are, how do I keep this short, concise, and compel a reply, which is really the CTA? Because if you're asking something that's going to make them think too much, if you're asking them something that is high commitment, when are you free for a 30-minute chat? They're just going to click out. Whereas if you're asking something which they know that they can get more information by just replying, sure, send it over. Yes, interesting. You're more likely to compel that reply.
I love that.
I think one final thing I'll say then on the messaging is coming back to the offer. This is not even in the copy, or at least it doesn't start in the copy, is go back to your offer and ask yourself, does this resonate in the outbound landscape where trust is at its lowest? If what you're asking is very high, try and compartmentalize it. So as an example, if you think about what we do, where we actually will run campaigns for clients, we could go out in the market and say, hey, we're expensive. We have a retainer service. Do you want to come on board? But that doesn't necessarily work in that landscape. But what we can do is we can say, hey, listen, we'd actually love to do a free audit of your account. We'd love to send you a lead list on the house that's going to be really relevant with these signals. We can take apart our core offer to get people to start the conversation with us. And then, of course, we can sell to them later on our core services. And most businesses I see are unwilling to do it because it extends the sales cycle. But if you're actually generating more revenue from it because you're closing more deals, and the other side of it is higher value deals, because once they've had that little bit of free value from you or that low cost value from it, they're much more likely to say, no, I want to spend more money with them because I trust them at this point. Compared to, so I think that's the other side of it. Think about that. What are you offering them in that email? Compartmentalize your offer and find a way to start the conversation. The outbound email is not where you're trying to sell your services. You're trying to start a conversation. I think that comes back to how we do that with our offers.
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat that. The outbound email is not where you sell your services. It is where you create the conversation. And I think that it sounds like a simple ask, but it's an extraordinarily big ask of the profession of sales, because we are such a misaligned profession, and the SDRs, BDRs, full cycle AEs are pushed so hard to set meetings, that they often do it at the expense of win rates and at ACVs. And I'm never going to be the person that tells you that sales cycles should not be short or not important. There's some also behavioral psychology happening there, where we want to make sure that we capture the attention, and while the interest and the attention are at an all-time high, we move them all the way through to the close. But if we have not built enough relevance and enough trust before we move into that middle of the funnel conversation, I mean, that's why those like close win rates are at an all-time low, or that win rates are at an all-time low. I love to hear you specifically call out the word trust. So my book, my debut book, yay, link is in the comments. Like, please, everybody go buy this damn book. But the subtitle is A Proven Formula to Earn Trust and Drive Revenue. And I got a lot of pushback from both my publisher and my brand strategist on including the words earning trust in the subtitle, because their thinking is that you should be able to say, like, I want to, or I want a profit generating pipeline. I want to drive revenue. And their challenge was like, are salespeople really saying, I want to earn trust? And the answer is no, most of them aren't saying that. But because it is the foundation of our profession, I was like, I'm sorry, like, this is core to everything I believe. It is core to my success as a leader, its success as a seller. Like, the word trust has to be in this title for this book to feel authentic to me and to what I stand for as a sales professional. So I'm so happy to hear you say that. My quick outbound tips before we tell people where to find us and follow us. I've been teaching folks the 110-100 rule, because I've realized that for things to stick, you got to make them super easy to remember. So 110-100 rule: one and only one clear, concise call to action. I do an entire like 4-hour afternoon workshop on sales messaging that just keeps coming back to, and make sure that we're reducing the cognitive load. How can we reduce the cognitive load? Nope, that's asking too much of folks. We want to make it as easy as possible for them, reduce the cognitive load. So, yeah. So one, clear, concise call to action, because once we ask folks to do more than one thing, we divide their attention, they're going to do nothing. So one, clear, concise call to action. 10 words in the preview text. So really making sure that we are optimizing for that subject line and those first 3 words, right? Because that, if we are not getting the opens, it's going to be really hard for folks to get the reads and the replies and the click-through rates and all of that. So make sure that the very first 10 words that somebody reads says something that matters to them. Spoiler alert, it is not, I hope you're well. It is not, I see that you are title at company. Like, please make it something that matters. And then 100 total words. When you are spinning up your copy, keep the emails at 100 words or less with white space in there, so that, again, they are very easy to scan. Short, simple sentences, lots of white space. Yeah. So 110, 100. There's so much nuance to how to write both technically proficient emails as well as like strong copywriting. But I think if you are just looking for a way to like audit what you're sending out now, following the 110-100 rule can help you get some immediate gains.
That's really great. Yeah.
Great. This was such a treat. Where should folks find you to learn more?
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you as well. Yeah, it's been really great conversation. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active. So you can type my name, Mohan, Mohan, Muthoo, Muthoo. You can also go to the website, springdrive.co, and find all of our stuff there as well.
Yay. Amazing. Such a treat, folks. You know me. I am a chronically online person. Find me on LinkedIn. Find me on TikTok at Sales Tips Talk. I'm also creating a crazy amount of video content for YouTube. I'm determined to grow my YouTube. All of my other channels are at B2B Sales Coach. So find me everywhere, and buy the book. Profit Generating Pipeline, a Proven Formula to Earn Trust and Drive Revenue. Buy the book. This was great. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks, Mohan, for having this conversation with me. Yeah, an absolute treat. We'll have to do it again sometime. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Definitely. Take care, guys.